So, good morning, everyone. It's really great to see all of you this morning, and this meeting is being recorded for those who have already sent their apologies. I want to first of all thank you for joining for this special meeting this morning. We're going to hear from our special guests, Ekow Eshun, in a few moments. But before I do so, I just want to update you on what the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry are doing to ensure that we have a strong arts centre and creative industry base in our city. Now, as you know, we've launched our campaign because we are absolutely shocked that the cuts that the capital has faced in the art scene has got worse and worse, particularly from November of last year. That's why I'm delighted that as the Secretariat for the All-Party Parliamentary Group for London as a global city, we've been able to produce a report backed by members of Parliament from all parties that clearly states that we need a strong funding base for the arts and creative industries across London, not just central London, not just the West End, but every single part of London, inner London and outer London as well. Not only has that happened, we will soon be meeting with the Minister for London, Greg Hands MP, to discuss this report. Yesterday, I can now confirm that we had a very productive meeting with the London Deputy Mayor for Business, Howard Dorber, and the Mayor of London's nighttime economy czar, Amy Lamé, who have agreed to work with us on a series of measures to ensure that there is sustainable funding for the Arts Council. We'll soon be meeting with the Shadow Arts Minister from the Labour Party. And I can also confirm that at 10:30, I and my colleagues will be meeting with senior officials from the Arts Council itself today to say that enough is enough. We need real and sustainable funding. This salami cutting of our arts is unacceptable. It's not only just unacceptable because the arts is critical for our lives, it's unacceptable because of the jobs and livelihoods that are dependent on arts and creative industries, not just directly, but also in the supply chains as well. So I want to assure you that we are going to continue, and I look forward to hearing from all of you very shortly in our discussion this morning. But I'm delighted that we've got with us today Ekow Eshun. Thank you, Ekow, so much for joining us. Ekow is a writer and a curator, and I'm sure you've seen Ekow many times on TV, like I have. So it's fantastic to meet you, even though it's in a kind of virtual forum, Ekow, but it's fantastic to meet with you. Ekow is the chair of the Fourth Plinth, which I think you all know is kind of pretty important, overseeing the key public art programme in our country. And Ekow is also the former director of the Institute of Contemporary Arts here in London. As well as that, Ekow is a curator of exhibitions, including very recently in the Black Fantastic at the Hayward Gallery. And of course, Ekow has been awarded the Curatorial Prize in 2023 from the Association for Art History. I hope I'm not embarrassing you, Ekow, if I say that you've been described by The Guardian as a cultural polymath. And I know you are a writer and presenter of documentaries. I've seen your work, including, of course, Dark Matter, a future of the Afro future on BBC, and also, of course, the BBC Radio 4 series White Mischief. In addition, Ekow has written and his work has appeared not just in The Guardian, but the Financial Times, The Observer, the New York Times, and Wired. And of course, Ekow has an honorary doctorate from London Metropolitan University, which I'm happy to say is one of the members of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Ekow, thank you so much for joining us today, and please, over to you.
Thank you, James. I mean, look, I think here less with a kind of prescription, more a conversation. So hopefully we can do that. That kind of makes sense for me. I mean, look, I think that you've already described this morning some of the initiatives and conversations you're already underway with in terms of talking to the Arts Council, talking to Tangam Debonair, you know, the current government. I mean, all of those things, and you know, the mayor's office, all of those things are of a piece at the moment, because I think, I mean, you'll be aware of this, the arts sector in London is both trying to recover out of COVID and actually, on some metrics, I think doing well. My perception and the conversations that I have across the sector are that visitor numbers to theatres and galleries and museums are back up to pre-COVID levels, which is great. But, you know, the economic situation around remains completely fraught that way. So although numbers are back up, costs, as we know, are up across the board, from, you know, energy cost, inflation cost, wage costs, all of these things. So there's a lot of strain in that sector, and as well as every other kind of environment, the arts isn't terribly different in there. And you can see a lot of, what's the right word? I guess fragility, fraughtness in there is really my biggest perception. People are, the standing framework, or the funding framework, has been at something of a standstill over the last few years. And really, I guess the issue really is, how do you get to renewal? How do you get to a place where you can invest further inside organizations and inside the sector at a time when that sector is being squeezed further, and when overall economically things are very flat? That's the conundrum that organizations are really trying to address. You know, it's interesting, and I hope he wouldn't mind me necessarily bringing up his name right now. Kwame Kwei-Armah is the artistic director of the Young Vic, announced his resignation after 6 years, I think, leading the Young Vic at the start this week. And he cited 13 years really of kind of diminishing returns in terms of lack of government support, and more than that, a kind of overall kind of disinterest from the government. I went to a reception earlier this week, and again, you know, between us, it was a reception for the art sector that was hosted by Keir Starmer. So kind of interesting reception. So most leaders from the art sector in one place, and really the things we were talking about, both those kind of economic issues, but also this kind of overall environment of indifference that has been in play for the last number of years, socially and culturally. I think the art sector is looking not just for friends and support, but for championing. We can make the case around the economic benefits of the arts, the absolute disproportionate return on investment that the arts has. We can make the case for the attraction to London that the creative economy brings in terms of investment into London from different companies looking to London as a site of creativity, of dynamism, of design, fashion, art, all of these areas. But there's also a case around how you promote a way of speaking of and engaging with the arts that's not purely just instrumental, that's not just about the money, but is also about saying, look, we come to a better London, and by extension Britain, is a better place as a consequence of treasuring the cultural sector, not preferencing that necessarily to everything else, but simply saying, look, how do we speak with complexity about who we are as a city, at who we are as a country. How do we get beyond some of the malaise of the last few years and both speak of some of the ways that these last number of years have been difficult with COVID and so on, and also reach towards something that allows us to think more positively about who we are. The arts is very good at thinking about optimism and joy. The arts is also very good at speaking about complexity, at speaking about the difficult things, about speaking about the dark things. Successful art projects, art events are really, really good at holding complexity, holding contradiction, speaking about just the kind of quite strangeness of our times right now. So I think my perception overall is that things are fragile to some extent, things are fraught to some extent, but also we're looking for a way that we can change some of the conversation around what the value, what the meaning, and what the potential worth of artistic engagement is. I would suggest, and I think most people in the art sector like to think, that what they bring is one of the key elements of what makes London what it is, as a thriving place, a dynamic place, culturally rich place. And as well as let's say practical things in terms of encouraging apprenticeships, in terms of trying to create more studio space for artists, they're practical things. And there's also a larger picture around, well, look, how do we speak of the arts as an environment that offers more, that builds on and delivers and embraces and enriches the texture and the society of our city. The arts is the space in between that can do a lot of that. And I think people in that environment are very keen for that case to be made simultaneously with case around how we think economically around what it is that can help generate further investment and further growth within the arts. Those would be my first upwards.
No, I think that's really interesting. Thank you, Ekow. Really thoughtful comments. I know that from what you've just said, therefore, just to follow that line of thought, you're saying that there needs to be a kind of a refreshed narrative in terms of how we engage with the arts. And I just wonder, before we open it up to our colleagues, how we would do that. I mean, you could argue, and I would argue as someone who isn't involved in the way that you are in the arts, but the arts is kind of there to fill a kind of a meaning in our lives, a kind of as that aesthetic that we all need for us to be who we are as humans. I guess though, if I said that to the Treasury, it would be a kind of the eyes would glaze over. So how do we develop that narrative? Do you think?
I mean, look, it is a really good. It's always the schools and hospitals argument. It's like, you're not gonna win on that basis. Quite legitimately, all those things come into play. So the question is, okay, look, what does this actually deliver? And again, like I said, there's the economic case that that the arts contribute significantly more than it costs, contribute significantly more into the economy. There are infrastructural strategies that can come into play. I mean, know the mayor's office already does a number of things around, like, for instance, studio spaces that they're trying to encourage and build in the city. There's a really interesting developing film industry in terms of studios and spaces in East London, in Barking and Dagenham and the outer boroughs. That's really interesting. Apprenticeships into the creative industries. They're some quite practical things that I think one can encourage. But interestingly, the narrative argument actually isn't a money issue. The narrative argument isn't even an issue, isn't necessarily an issue you want to go toe to toe with the Treasury over. This is part of the public discourse around what the arts can mean. It's not, I guess my overall point would be that it's not just the sort of fluffy stuff. It's not the superfluous stuff that you strip out of a budget. Like you say, first of all, it's the connective stuff, but also how do we get to feel better about ourselves as a country? My suggestion is it's been a gloomy few years, but we don't turn the corner on that just by saying, oh, everything's great. I think we address how we move forward as a society by being able to speak with eloquence and complexity about who we are, about some of the things that trouble us, about some of the things that unite us. That kind of nuance is really powerfully expressed through theatre or film or art and so on. And I think I would encourage us to think beyond this sense that these are the superficial things, that these are the nice things on top. I would encourage us to think about, actually, look, if we want growth for London, if we want more tourists, if we want a more dynamic economy, we also have to think about how we speak with real sincerity about what it is we're trying to create, what kind of society we're trying to create. And I know that potentially sounds kind of airy, but I actually do mean it. Again, just to reference as an example, it's not per se political, but I'm using it as an example. So this event I went to on Monday, Keir Starmer was talking about, we want the Labour government to have a decade of growth when they come in. All fine, but that growth can't be predicated exclusively on the economic. Nothing wrong with that at all. But okay, well, what does that look like? What does that feel like? What is the language we use? How do we feel through that? How do we grow and grow together at a time of all kinds of divisions that we can look at? How do we grow beyond, a kind of culture wars environment where we're trying to pit people against each other? And how do we do that with honesty? How do we do that with nuance? How do we find ways to connect across space? So all of these things, I would say, are this is the territory that's actually better suited to address not just culture as a thing that happens inside spaces, but culture as the thing that connects who we are and how we live as a society.
I think that's so powerful. I guess, therefore, what you're saying, Ekow, is that we need. Oh, I'm asking actually the question. Is what you're saying is that what we need to develop effectively, to use the jargon, coalitions of interests amongst wider civil society, and will that be difficult because of kind of, in a way, the culture wars that you've described, where it's a them and us attitude in terms of a whole range of different themes which are out there at the moment?
I mean, I actually really like your description there, James. Coalitions of interest across different sectors of society. Yes to that. Yes, it's not easy, but what's the point otherwise? The point otherwise is that there are already narratives in play. There are already stories in play. There are already stories being told about who we are. In a way, one of the ways to challenge, like, you either challenge that with a compelling narrative or you give into that. And then we live just with division. So again, I'm not trying to promulgate this as a kind of politics first approach. I'm saying actually that we get to richer, kind of emotionally and creatively, artistically and financially, we get to a richer place all around if we understand that, yeah, there are things that divide us, but we also think about the ways that we can have that kind of conversation. We think, in other words, both about the mechanisms around and the strategies and the structures of the art sector. We also think about what the greater purpose of it is. Greater purpose is overall to kind of enrich how we live. So that I would just say that can be part of a narrative, that can be part of how we think about this, so we don't lose sight of that. Because what's happened, just from my perspective, what's happened across many versions of, okay, what's our art strategy and so on, is that things get quite instrumental quite quickly. You come back to the treasury questions quite quickly. So I would just say that it's also important to have another layer to the narrative that isn't just about this amount, this return, and because in the end you will still be fighting, we'll still be fighting against the schools and hospitals arguments. Not that those are valid arguments to have, but there has to be more to the conversation. There has to be more to the dialogue than that.
Yeah, no, I very much agree. That is actually quite a stimulating point, which I will come back to in a moment. But if I may, Ekow, let's open up to our colleagues. Thank you. Yeah. And any questions or thoughts from colleagues? I could ask Ekow lots of questions, but I'm going to hold off. Yeah, Abby, please.
Hi, good morning. That was so insightful, Ekow, and I'm so totally on the same page. From a marketing and business perspective, I've worked with a few galleries and with a few cultural events, and it comes down to we don't have enough funding to do what we need to do to spread the message, to tell that story, to engage. And the route, I believe, and this is just my personal observation, is changing the industry in terms of, and I know you touched on it earlier, in terms of business models, because times have changed from where it was before, and we need to future-proof the industry itself into where it's going into the digital age. So there's a bit of a disconnect. I can see that in terms of really streamlining what it was to where we want to get it to. There's no doubt that London is the first destination for arts. People come. There's a massive impact in terms of, if we talk about the economy, people come to London to visit places, to watch shows, to engage, to really dive deep into heritage. And London is a multicultural city, and it's about connecting those dots. Also, you've made a really good point in terms of I'm going to say the feel good, but I think it's more than that in terms of the impact, what art does and the culture that the industry does to the well-being, the impact of education, the impact of all of those things. I do believe, for example, if there was, I don't know, a 10-year, 15, 20-year program from the government funding in terms of supporting every part of that industry, because there's lots of facets that really are involved in terms of making sure that the next generation of people in the industry are encouraged to go into those careers, because it's moving now, as you echoed earlier, that people are sort of moving, they've kind of lost their mojo. So I think investing in that next generation, yes, it is, inverted commas, it's a career, it's an industry. So that has to be taken a lot seriously. And by doing that, there is a link between obviously the economy, but I think just for my last, I'm just going to finish off and say it's got to be future proofed. So no, really insightful. I'm really delighted to be on this call.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Before I come to the next speaker, is there anything you want to?
Yeah, look, I completely agree with that. One of the things that's so interesting for me, look, we've all collectively been through an incredible and odd, quite disturbing existential time the last few years. Like, nothing like this has happened in the post-war period. Nothing. We've all been through that. It's very hard to process it because everyone goes through that and we just get back to what we were doing. In a way, like, there's a really interesting question about, okay, look, how can we go through that and actually build on that And again, and these are economic questions as much as they're anything else. Everyone's trying to figure that out. What is a business model that kind of works right now? You know, audience numbers are shifted around. People are, you know, different work practices, all sorts of things. Now, okay, so this is like, I'm throwing something in here because not for any reason, but just as an example of, okay, well, look, what does doing different perhaps look like in those terms? It's kind of interesting for a moment. Okay, look, and this is, look, I accept for a moment this is a kind of absurd idea, but I'm just throwing it in, just an example. Like, what does it look like if every business has an artist in residence, has a poet in residence, has a writer in residence, has a musician in residence? What does it look like? There's an argument that, again, like, it's a kind of weird peripheral thing. Why would you do that? Except that, how do we get to, again, addressing how we feel as individuals, how we feel perhaps as companies, how we create a culture within companies that withstands the fact that people are working apart more than they used to? How do you get to a sense of voice, of agency, of possibility, both within a company or an organization and across society? I'm not saying practically, I'm using this as a kind of metaphor, but you have an artist in residence across every place. The reason why you would do that is because you want to try and find a different language internally for how we speak, how we see the world, what we value, how we go into the world, how we walk through the world as an organization or a company. I'm using that purely as an example, simply to say, okay, look, the worth of the arts is that it allows us to connect with ourselves and to connect with the world around us. And that, when we're talking about a world both that's kind of diffuse and kind of divisive right now, but also when we're talking about a world that's more connected than it's ever been in human history as a consequence of social media, which can take us apart as well as bring us together, but it offers us an opportunity to communicate and to share and to see different perspectives. We're at a proliferation that we've never had before. We also have a kind of surprising opportunity, I suppose, to share perspectives, to share voices. So I just use that as an example, not as a policy statement, just to say, actually, look, interesting things happen when you come to think and look from the perspective of a kind of creative position rather than purely or exclusively a commercial position.
Yeah, that's interesting actually that you present it in the way of actually improving the productivity of businesses, which is a really interesting angle. So,
Yeah.
but no, it's really, really cool. Thank you. And Popo, it's great to see you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Hello?
Hi.
Yeah, hi, yeah, please. Yeah.
I'm sure if you could hear me. If it glitches, let me know. I've had some internet problems. No, thank you so much, Ekow. I came in a bit later because of technical difficulties, but I caught up. So James knows me anyway and our company. So I'm coming from similar lenses, but adding in also different touch. So basically, our company, Kai Africa, is focused on the showcasing the economic and cultural value that African music brings to the global recorded music scene. So again, for us, because we understand that the challenges and we've understood how the governments fail to see the value in the arts. And so we are focusing, and I think two things that I would like to comment on is that data and insight, I think, are critical. So in terms of, apart from what we are doing as a company, but I think it would be great, like what the London Chamber is doing, working with organizations like us, for example, who are experts in the growth of this exponential growth in the African music scene. So we could look at trends. So at the end of the day, whether the government likes it or not, African music is one of the fastest growing scenes in the world. It always has been, but it hadn't given a platform. If they can understand and tap into that and see the growth and how, from an economic stance, it benefits London because of the diaspora connections and the global connection. London does not want to lose out on that. I mean, I'll give you a classic example. I'm based in Brighton. I'm currently having a talk with the Brighton and Hove City Council about hosting like one of the first sort of African music events. But they're a bit slow on catching up on that. So I told them fine. If you're not interested, I'll move to London. So I'm saying the same. If London is not aware of the growth of certain trends, of certain music hubs that are so powerful, they will lose out to other cities and other places. There are many countries and spaces that are using, like the other lady said, technology, like we do with our company. We are focusing on data and insights to prove where the growth is, where the trajectory is. And I think insights are powerful that would help. So for example, we are looking to build case studies and reports around that so that, for example, we can work along with London Chamber and other organizations that are interested. So I think it would behoove the government to be aware of organizations like us who are the experts, who understand the fields. And mind you, when I say music, Africa in terms of arts, in all art sectors, is actually growing faster than other places in the world. So in music, theater, drama, poetry, you name it. So I think that is very, very important that the government, one, is aware of other scenes and other trends. And London's got one of probably the largest African heritage, Black Caribbean diaspora network within Europe. So that's a starting point. The other thing is the correlation between, this is outside, this is in music and culture in general, regardless, is a correlation. And again, coming from our reports that we're working on, how do we showcase, if the focus is on education and hospitals, and rightfully so, like we said, showcasing the correlation between mental health and music, mental health and arts. We all know that during COVID, the studies have shown, and the proof is there, that during COVID, everybody was able to tap into what music, as an example. When theaters and plays were put online, it helped with people's mental health. So if they could be organizations that showcase that, or insights or reports that showcase the value, because if we're saying if people's mental health is lowered or is reduced because of the arts, surely then that automatically impacts people being hospitalized or medication, if you see what I mean. So if there can be a correlation. So I think maybe it's finding, are there other agencies, are there specialized, I don't know, market data research companies that have those type of reports? That's one element. And then, as I said, getting back to what we do is the government being aware, like the other lady also said, we also focus highly on technology. So again, looking at art from that aspect, how does the technology, because the government is obviously focused on STEM a lot globally. So again, how do we use STEM to facilitate? So for example, with us, we're looking at the use of blockchain within what we're doing for the African music scene. That's not the only technological tool. So again, how has the government taken blockchain? And then finally, well, as one of many different technological, and then finally also in terms of careers, as the other lady also rightfully said, this is what we're also focusing on, is it is a career, it is a proper profession. It's not just some whimsical thing. And I think that's where they lack. They don't put the same value on arts as they do on STEM and on all that. But I think if there's a case study that can be made, so my final point is, for us, we just recognize that actually, do you know what? We are going to create a new path for us, build our case study powerful enough so that the government, we can take it to them to say, look, this is what Kai Africa is doing around the global African music scene. We've got the stats for mental health, technology, careers, everything. This is a model that's powerful, that is working. Are you interested in using this model? Could you work with us? Because the reality is, if they're not interested, there's many other spaces globally that are. We live in a globalized society. So we're not just going to stick to one pace. We'd love it to be in London, but if London is not willing to take it, we'll move to the States, we'll move anywhere else, Africa, anywhere else, because that's the, and I think that those are the case studies that sometimes need to be a bit sent in quite hard for them to maybe understand. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, look, so I mean, so much in there. Just to touch on just one point about that, music and technology have always been allied, more so now than ever. The really interesting thing, actually, I don't know your business, but look, I would say that you've actually got the metrics on your side. If you're dealing with African diasporic populations in London or in Britain, and music, and Africa internationally, just like, at a time when Burna Boys and WizKids can sell out stadiums in London, at a time when many of the most exciting music artists in the country are of African origin, Stormzy, Sims, etc., 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 you know, through to live music acts. The numbers involved in that, the numbers of listens, of streams, the numbers those people are generating, that's audience. Way beyond almost everything. Like, in a way, it's a really interesting moment because there's physical global numbers, but there's also just the demographic shifts in somewhere like London in terms of the amount more of African people being born and growing up and emigrating to London, lots of things basically. So yes, using data that way, yes, telling a compelling story that way. I think you're in an interesting place. I don't know what the outcome is, but I think you're in an interesting place to marshal that, to recognize that, and to highlight how somewhere like London is changing in that way, how the voices of the city are changing in that way because of demographic shift, and how that's being reflected, culturally speaking, in the music industry, in audiences for different African artists. Yeah, I think there's possibility there, and there's really interesting things in terms of shaping narratives around that.
Okay, it's really great. Thank you both. Really fascinating discussion. I can see that, if I'm right, sorry, bear with me. I thought one of my colleagues was here. I'm just going to double check. Bear with me, guys. So, Kareem, are you with us? I don't know if Kareem's with us. No, maybe not. Okay, I'll come back to that later. Are there any other questions or thoughts from colleagues before I ask Ekow a few more questions, if I may, and then we could think about a roadmap in terms of next steps? Okay, no, Kareem has left us. But any other questions or thoughts? Okay, so I'm gonna ask you a few pointers because I think I know we've got on this call Deborah and others who were working together on this campaign to stop further cuts to the arts and also to restore funding. We have made the point about the fact that you know there's billions of pounds actually generated by the arts, so actually it pays for itself. But also there's that wider kind of culture or aesthetic point which should not be missed. And I guess in a way, you know, a chamber of commerce naturally thinks about business, but also has a wider remit, and it's got a not-for-profit activity as well. Would you say that we should have a twin track approach, one which is, as I think you brilliantly described it, as instrumental in terms of the you know, badgering the treasury, as it were, and the other is more developing those coalitions of interest, and if so, you know, what are your thoughts on that, really, Ekow?
I mean that that would be my approach. I think the numbers game is really important for obvious reasons, but it's just, I mean, I don't know about you, James, but you know, I've sat through these different meetings and conversations going back to the Blair government, you know, and it was the Blair government that first introduced in popular discourse anyway, introduced into policy the idea of the creative industries, the idea that you could quantify the investment outcomes in the arts, you could put a price tag to that and so on, and that's been pretty much part of discourse around this sector ever, you know, since then. Like I said, the downside with that is then you end up, once you're exclusively in a numbers game, you still end up fighting the treasury and so on, but you're fighting then only on their terms around that. So yeah, so in terms of forming a coalition of interest, like it sounds like you're already doing that in parts anyway, Arts Council, Mayor's Office, and so on. I think that's important. I guess it feels like, and again, this is, I'm just talking, I'm not trying to tell you what to do. The point isn't to duplicate that, because what happens very quickly is that there's a sort of anxiety that surfaces in those meetings, and people, the treasury comes up, oh, we have to make this case, we have to make the case. Yes, you have to, but also, in fact, even to join those dots amongst various organizations and to feel like, okay, look, we've got something to say here, we've got something to sell here. It's also important, I think, to develop a narrative that sits beside the money argument that works on a different level, so that it doesn't just devolve to that. So that it's not just because, yeah, you will win some, but you will also lose some in that basis. There's got to be more to the case than that. And some of that comes out of qualitative case studies. Some of that comes out of being able to say, well, look, you know, look at what London actually looks like right now, demographically, creatively. Look at what's been made in the city, but also what are the cultural consequences of that? What are the cultural implications of that? What are the cultural opportunities that come from that? What's the vision for how the city develops? What's the vision for the role of culture in the city? Not just we invest and we grow because yes, and again, we grow disproportionately because of what we know about what the arts contributes, but what's also the vision? What do we see? What does the city feel like? Those are also questions I think it's important to address, because there's also more than one constituency you were talking to. Yes, there's a treasury argument, but you also need to make the case both between yourselves, but emotionally, or with an emotional literacy that speaks to London as a whole as well.
Yes. And that level of emotional intelligence, which we all accept, is fundamental to who we are and how we achieve in our lives is often overlooked, is it not, in these kind of discussions. So yeah, no, I do agree very much. I know, is there any, because I know we've got Johannes with us and Deborah and other colleagues, is there any other thoughts that colleagues have before we move to next steps? Yeah, hi Deborah.
Hi, and sorry I was a bit late. I've got a terribly bad throat at the moment. You may have covered this, but I just wanted to kind of think about Let's Create the Arts Council strategy, which has led to so many of the cuts, I suspect, in London. And yet, if you look at the targets and the objectives of Let's Create, I think ENO fulfills most of them, if not all, and yet they suffered terrible cuts. And an opera company, and we have hundreds and hundreds of opera singers in our membership, actually relies on a very complex pattern of musicians, artists of all kinds of different backgrounds, set designers, etc., and the building. And as I understand it, the move to Manchester will be to a place with a really bad acoustic. So it's just, in terms of the artistic reasons behind it, they simply do not stack up. So I totally agree with Ekow and what he was saying in relation to you have to do more than just talk about figures. And I think, you know, the Arts Council does attempt to do it, but it's gone way off track with something like the ENO and hasn't even met its own objectives. I just wondered if you had any thoughts, and this may be too political, about the recently announced investigation into Arts Council by Liz Fraser. So they went through a review, an internal review, and she's now announced that there's going to be a much more formal review of Arts Council and its operations, which I think is really interesting, because I'm not sure they've been brilliant for London. I think there are all kinds of arguments around how funding should be possibly restructured. I think there's an argument to say that perhaps funding should be coming much more via local authorities, and that actually would get a much better form of integration in relation to the arts into localities. This may be too political, but I just wondered what your thoughts were.
I mean, it's interesting. So actually, to be honest, I didn't know that was going to be the case, or in terms of that announcement. There, you know, it's tricky because everyone has different criticisms of the Arts Council. You know, absolutely everyone, because you know, even if it was functioning in the best possible world, it can't fulfill different competing desires. They're absolutely things, you know, I would look at. I used to sit on the board of the Arts Council, so I know it quite well as an organisation. There are absolutely things I would look at. At the same time, I'm sceptical of a government-led inquiry into exactly what it is. I don't know the terms of reference for that looking into the Arts Council. I think that's the crucial thing. I'd be very, as I'm sure others are, be very wary about exactly what the intention behind that is. And I suspect there are competing things here. There's what a Conservative government might look at and think about as areas of concern. There's what others might look at and think about as areas of concern for the Arts Council. One of my things is that, you know, one of the main criteria for the Arts Council, or one of the main criteria that they've set themselves, is to increase demographic participation in the arts, you know, across different communities, socioeconomic sectors, and so on. There hasn't been much shift at all in those engagement patterns over many years, and despite that being one of the primary objectives. I mentioned that not simply because it's a kind of feel-good factor, but it's because you're trying to actually reach out, you're trying to actually engage, trying to actually live according to the, you know, kind of ambitions and metrics you set yourselves. So I think there's certain things that the Arts Council can do better in many ways. The E&O situation is interesting because, again, that's the thing of the Arts Council trying to follow government policy around kind of diversifying things, and has these not necessarily intended outcomes. I welcome questioning about how the Arts Council invests, spends money, makes decisions. At the same time, I don't necessarily welcome that inquiry in terms of hearing about that, because I'd be worried about exactly what criteria that were being explored. I'm not necessarily sure those would be the same ones that would be concerns for me.
Yeah, I mean, I just raise it because I don't know if, James, you know about it. It was only announced last week, and I don't think we've yet got the remit or the terms of reference. No one's yet been appointed to lead it. I'm not sure how much it has to do with government at all. I just say it's an interesting step, given nobody thought it was going to happen. And of course, there's an awful lot of conversations at the moment about funding mechanisms and whether they should be moving more away from the centre and back to local authorities, which of course have been starved of central government cash. So I just think it's something that we should be aware of, because certainly, and we've got about 200 corporate members. Corporates, that means they could be anything from opera companies through to orchestras, and they are not happy. I think it's fair to say.
I think there's definitely a case for absolutely looking at that, keeping an eye on that, and actually having a point of view on that in terms of what the goals of that might be, in terms of what preferred outcomes from your perspective might be.
Exactly.
No, that's very true. That's really helpful, Deborah. Maybe we can, you know, with you and other colleagues, we'll catch up on that very much. So that's really an interesting development. Thank you, Deborah.
Thanks.
So that's really helpful. Thank you. So Ekow, I'm just thinking about everything that we've discussed this morning. I think there is, I do believe with you that if you have a kind of wider civil society base, that's going to inevitably have an impact on that kind of instrumental theme that organisations like the London Chamber of Commerce normally focuses on. Maybe if you're happy, we can work together in the time ahead so we can develop those coalitions of interest, so that we change the narrative, as it were, and it becomes, there's some kind of automaticity, as it were, in terms of the arts, the economy, the wider social good, for want of a better expression. If you would be happy with that, Ekow.
Yeah, let's definitely talk. I think because there's so much conversation that takes place in the arts and about the arts, one of the things that I'm aware of is that, yeah, it doesn't, or the really strange thing is that the art sector is full of storytellers. It's pretty much every area. It's full of people, you know, with incredible capacity to kind of engage and think through these things. But there generally isn't a kind of unified message that comes out of that, other than we're short of cash and, you know, kind of need some more cash. So yeah, my premise would simply be that it would be helpful if there was, let's say at the very least, a shared language, a shared set of priorities, a shared way of understanding the worth and the possibility of the arts that includes a financial case, but that also goes beyond exclusively that, and that makes a case that speaks of who we are, how we live, how we want to live, how we want to walk through the world as a shared city and as a shared society. And I hope that doesn't sound too whimsical as an approach. I tend to think it's anyway, that's
Yeah, I think it's actually, I think it's a very powerful approach that could have a long-term or medium-term legacy, maybe long-term, but only medium-term at the very least. So no, I very much agree with you. Thank you so much. So I want to thank Ekow very much for being with us. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Those of you going to watch the recording, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and we will be, as I say, later on today, I will be with the Arts Council, talking with them about the very issues that we're discussing. I will update all of you on this approach, and working with Ekow and other colleagues, we will move to the next step in this campaign. But I can assure you that the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry is laser-like in its approach in ensuring that we have a strong art scene covering all genres and all art forms, to ensure that London remains the place for the arts, which isn't just good for London, it's good for levelling up the whole of the UK, and it's also good for our world in the way that Ekow has brilliantly described. So my brilliant thanks, my heartfelt thanks to Ekow, and also my thanks to all of you. I hope you have a great Valentine's Day, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Thanks very much. Thanks, guys. All the best.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, James.
Bye.
Thanks, Ekow.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.